Here's one of the first concepts I ever made for the game, which was like this, just sort of like ruins in the distance. I guess it was the winter of 2015 or like really early 2016, it was around then. And I had taken some time to develop some horror game mechanics, basically like, you know, you're just regular player character movement and a little bit of AI stuff. But I wasn't super happy with the projects I'd been working on because they were sort of like that. They were this really kind of like dark gray sort of ambient environments, and I wanted to make something that was just really colorful. I'd been really inspired by electronic musicians like Tycho and Boards of Canada, so I took that horror games mechanics, essentially just the player mechanics, and I was like, well, I can make a puzzle game like this, sort of like Talos Principle or other games like that. And I ended up taking that, and it eventually became what Epitasis is now. At the same time, I was going to school for game art and design at a local community college here, and I ended up getting my associate's degree from there. And as soon as I was done with that, I ended up going to Bethesda Softworks to work as a QA tester, and I did that for roughly a year, a little under a year. But I wasn't super happy while I was working there, mostly due to with my education and kind of how I left it. So I decided to leave and go back to school for computer science this time around. A lot of things happened right when I left Bethesda. The main one being is I took a trip to Costa Rica for a month. I was there exploring, hiking around, doing all sorts of things. And the Epitasis, it had started just a little bit right when I had left Bethesda, but not to the full scale I had actually really wanted to take it. So as soon as I got back from the trip to Costa Rica, I started full production in my free time making the game. So it wasn't really started back then. I just had a general idea of what I wanted to do, and I didn't fully start executing it until I got back from that big trip. We had it working probably 6 months ago, and then now I don't know.
What's on it?
It's Galaga, Frogger.
I love Galaga.
Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man, and
The better Pac-Man.
Donkey Kong. I'd actually been in talks with a couple publishers when I was first starting out, and they wanted to know what the game was like. They really liked the atmosphere and stuff I was creating. But those didn't really go through, and I'm a little happy they didn't, almost, because the basis of the game was laid out, and I knew all the things I needed to do to get the game done, but the game itself was still pretty heavily in development. Like, a lot of the areas weren't playable from start to finish. A lot of the puzzles weren't even created, so there was a lot to do, but I had a good idea of what the art looked like, and I had a good idea of what the game was going to be, so I felt comfortable being able to do that. And we had a demo, so I had one area of the game sort of complete, or at least in a playable fashion that people could check out and see what it was like. When I first started, I had an initial idea of, okay, I really want this idea of the player being on Earth, but finding this portal and going through it and being transported to this place that's completely different from what they're used to. I wanted to create this sense that, hey, I'm on Earth, here's all this like human technology, and then as soon as you go through the portal, it's, you know, a completely different sort of environment and feel. I think the game is actually pretty situated sort of like how Fez is, with these environments that are kind of connected by these portals, and they're all sort of separate, but they're all sort of interconnected at the same time, and you're discovering as you go. In my free time, I really like to do urban exploration, exploring abandoned areas. So I've tried to take that aspect combined with also hiking and put them into this project and try to convey those similar feelings of, you know, coming across this, not necessarily decrepit place, but coming across it and just wondering what could have gone on here however long ago it was actually being inhabited by something. The environments in Epitasis are actually quite large, so I want the player to be able to walk into an area and know, okay, there's a puzzle to be solved here. But at the same time, I also think it's important not to give them too much context. You don't want to hold their hand, especially if it's an exploration game. I have come from LUMORIA, where I'm making these just, you know, FPS encounters where it's very clear, kill all the enemies and then you're good to go to the next area. But, you know, a puzzle exploration game, there's so much more going on. Everybody's going to have their own idea on what makes a good puzzle. I try to, you know, focus a lot more on the exploration aspect, but also have these sort of puzzle areas that the player will go into, sort of like Portal or the Talos Principle. They each have their like designated area where, hey, this is a puzzle. Each game is different, you know, they all have their own quirks and stuff like that. Since in Epitasis you're hiking around these alien worlds, I wanted to capture that sense of feeling of hiking out in the natural world. So for example, you'll be walking around and it'll randomly start raining, or it'll fog up and it'll cloud. So it does all these sorts of things to sort of draw you more into the environment and put you in that sort of situation that you would find when you're, you know, hiking out on Earth. No Man's Sky is a game everybody compares it to, but I mean, it wasn't that big of an influence, I think, that people might think it was. Everybody knows what that game is, so they have something immediately to relate Epitasis to, which is kind of a good and bad thing. I mean, No Man's Sky and Epitasis both draw from like 70s sci-fi art. And I think having those really bright, vivid colors is what people, you know, as soon as they see that, No Man's Sky is such a big game. Everybody knows who it is. Like Sean Murray was on, you know, Stephen Colbert's show. But as I progressed making the game, my Halo influences came up pretty quickly from creating like Forerunner architecture and stuff like that. But my initial inspirations weren't really Halo, and they weren't really No Man's Sky for the look of the game. It was actually going back to those electronic artists such as Tycho and Boards of Canada. They have their own specific style, like sonically, so I was able to sort of use that as my inspiration going forward. And Tycho is a graphic designer too, so I've had a lot of inspiration from that. You know, music has always been my main inspiration for pretty much anything I work on. And that's how I got into talk with Funk Fiction. He actually reached out to me after a Kotaku article.
The first time I learned about Epitasis was a Kotaku article. Seeing the few screenshots and reading about the game excited me. I was stoked and I just wanted to be a part of it. After reading that article and seeing some footage and screens of the game, I was so excited about it that I looked up his email and sent him a cold email. Just not expecting anything, just on the off chance that he might want me to be involved. And I told him, I love what you're doing. I think you're making a very beautiful game, and I would just be thrilled to even contribute a track or two to your game, and offered to make him an audition track, which is pro bono, for the hopes of him having me even slightly involved, let alone become his composer.
At that time, I was still looking for a composer pretty much. I had been working with one, but it hadn't really been going anywhere, and it wasn't really working in the way I wanted it to. But when he reached out, I had him do a demo, and I knew immediately, I was like, this is the guy. I found him. So I was really happy when he reached out.
He sent me a video of the game in a very alpha state, and then I wrote to it and sent him the track, which is now the main menu music after much further polish. He said he'd get back to me, he liked it, but that there were other people also vying for the position. And a couple days later, he gets back to me, he said, no, you're the guy. I want you to be the composer for Epitasis. I started writing music, I think, just maybe a month or two later, when he said, okay, I'm actually gonna develop the game further and make a trailer for it. So I think around March, I wrote down some chords. I think I just jammed for 20 minutes. And then I had my guitarist and a very good friend of mine, Andy Studer, come into my studio with me and have him play guitar improvised with my direction. And that actually ended up becoming the source material for a lot of the music in the game, and entirely for the trailer, because I took so many clean snippets out of that jam session with him that was all recorded and wrote them into the composition, into the overall production. About a month before the Kickstarter actually was set up and launched, the trailer was already done.
I started the project, I wanted it to be not only a puzzle game, but it's sort of an audio-visual project. So the music was something very important to me. And going back to like how Taiko and Boards of Canada are inspirations musically, like I wanted the game to be focused in on those sorts of music aspects as well. I wanted it to be something that complemented the visuals.
At first, we were thinking about just making full tracks, like fully produced tracks, which is what happened. But the way you implement a fully produced track into a game, it would be way too distracting unless it was an action-packed game. You know, this is a much more ambient puzzler. And so that kind of informed moving forward with the music, how to go about it. We chose the dynamic of stemming out isolated elements of the music.
He'll take 4 minutes of music and transform it into like 40 minutes of music just by breaking it down, and then I have all these variations I can play with, and the music just, it complements the environments so well.
We thought this would be a really cool interactive component of the game if, you know, the music starts with a melody and some wind textures and some pads and some bass. Well, let's just have the wind texture by itself and maybe a quiet melody, and that's it. I went to the 2018 MagFest, which is the first time Lucas and I ever met in person, and that was great because we got along and clicked right away, and it was very, very easy to hang out with each other. It was actually kind of the highlight of my trip, was hanging out with Lucas.
I think we've become pretty good friends at this point, working on the project together, and having him on the team and being able to show him things that I can't just show everybody, and getting direct critical feedback on what I'm working on has been a really good aspect too.
It felt like we were friends already for a very long time when we were hanging out during last year's MagFest. He went to this year's MagFest and showcased Epitasis there, and to our pleasant surprise, there were lines forming to play it. There was a lot of exuberance and excitement for the game, which was a great sign.
All the reception that we've had, we took it to Microsoft's pre-PAX event for Xbox. We've taken it to MagFest. We've taken it to a bunch of other smaller events, and everybody who plays it seems to really, really enjoy it, and they love the art style, which is awesome because art has always been a really big focus of mine. The feedback that we've gotten from especially our pre-PAX event and the MagFest event, both of those we came back with a lot of feedback, very good feedback, and we've gone and tried to make the game the best we can. We've iterated on mechanics and just tried to polish them as far as we can while keeping the game's identity to what it has always been.
Lucas, you know, he's practically a one-man show. We've always been pushing each other, and he's always very generous with compliments. You know, whenever I tell him that the world he's creating pushes me as a composer to make music that's better than what I could have done without his world, is something that gets reciprocated by him, where he says the same thing back to me, that the music I'm making pushes him to create a world that matches the music. And that's a really humbling and flattering compliment, but it just goes right back at him. You know, he's making this world that's unbelievably beautiful.
Overall, the soundtrack, I think, has been turning into something that's really, really special. Like, I don't think many indie games go as far as we've gone with the music. They all, like, so many indie games have wonderful soundtracks, but we've taken to this level to where when you go play the game, like, it's almost its own sort of thing, even when you compare it directly to the soundtrack itself that you'll hear, like, on Spotify or something. The most enjoyable thing about Making Epitasis has been crafting this experience, and I think when people play it, I want them to have this sort of feeling of almost elevation, like coming out of it thinking they experienced something interesting, not necessarily like, oh man, that was like really fun, but sort of thinking about it for a long time after they play it.
That's the experience I'd like to get to people, is sheer joy and beauty and fun. The visual component and the musical component are elevated by each other from the compounded experience.
When you're making a game over the course of 3 years, like Epitasis has been, I've been working on it since, again, early 2016, I think you go through various stages of your life, and you think about different things, you go through different phases emotionally, so having aspects like that in your life, I think, directly influence whatever work you're creating. So, I mean, it wasn't just like one emotion, it's a whole, vivid spectrum of them, and just trying to focus all of them into the game and kind of create something that embodies the person who made it.